The second story is called Rebirth, Replay and Rebirth, and it's about Cyclonus. And what we have, it starts off with Galvatron being like, oh my gosh, I'm alive. But it's mostly about Cyclonus, and we see him on Gorlon Prime, and he is recycling the bodies of all of his comrades because he thinks that it's going to give them honor. And then Galvatron shows up, and he's like, no, we can make an army, we can fight. And Cyclonus is like, no, we're not going to do that. And then Galvatron he brings back Scourge, and Cyclonus is still like, no. And there's a funny bit where Galvatron is making his new army of sweeps. I think, yeah, it's sweeps. And instead of them being made in Galvatron's image as they were supposed to be, they were made in Scourge's image. Ha, that's funny. And it's mostly just back and forth between Galvatron and Cyclonus as to whether or not Cyclonus should go with Galvatron, and Cyclonus is like, no, I do not think that there is any honor, I don't think that there's really any purpose in me going with you. And then at the end, Galvatron's like, no, you don't have to be a mindless slave to me, I have specific jobs for you. And Cyclonus is like, okay, fine, I'll go with you. And it ends with them going off to begin their mission. So that's really all that story is. That obviously has significantly more plot than the Replay story. I thought that there really wasn't anything necessarily wrong with this story. I'm just not a huge fan of the whole Dead Universe thing because I find it really confusing. And I felt kind of lost when I was reading it. I had to read through it a couple of times to get the full gist of what was going on and how this connected with All Hail Megatron and with Revelation. But it's fine. Art's fine. It's fine. Neither of these two stories blew me away. Like, I really wanted something in the Sunstreaker story to make me go like, oh, Sunstreaker. But nothing did, which is fine, because there really wasn't that much more to do with Sunstreaker. The Galvatron Cyclonus story, that's more just me not really caring as much about the storyline. Though I do think that it would have been quite a bit more interesting if Cyclonus really had not gone with Galvatron, because he goes through the entire story being like, no, fine, yeah. And maybe if he hadn't gone with Galvatron, we could have had like Cyclonus out doing his own stuff, which that would have been kind of cool. But what are you gonna do? So these were okay. Finally, we get to an issue that I actually have in my possession, and that would be issue 15 of All Hail Megatron Coda. Yeah. The first story in here is called Everything in Its Right Place, and it's technically a Cup story, I think, or I think it's presented as a Cup story, but really it's kind of more of a Prowl story. It's really both of them, but Prowl takes a big part. And the basic gist of this story is that Springer is looking for Cup, and Prowl has moved him to this secret place that he can be worked on. And what we see is Cup, after being rescued in Spotlight Cup, kind of being rehabilitated to what we see in All Hail Megatron. And there's a lot of kind of back and forth stuff between Springer and Prowl. They're arguing about what's right for Cup. And they explain about the cigar thing, and I kind of am not a big fan of the way that they explained it. I don't mind what it's doing, though what they say in the comic is that it's basically medicine for Cup, so he doesn't kind of relapse into flashbacks from Spotlight Cup. But they still call it like a cigar. The thing is, at the end of All Hail Megatron, either Spike or, was it Spike? Daniel? I think it was Daniel. Whichever Witwicky was talking to Cup was like, why do you have a cigar? And he was like, what's a cigar? And the thing is, cigar and cigar are really close together. If that's really what it's called, he would have known, and he would have been like, oh, I don't know, I just have it. He would have been like, what are you talking about? Because that was a funny joke in All Hail Megatron, but now it doesn't apply. Why does Coda keep doing this to me? Everything changes. But besides that thing, I'm so done with that cigar, though. So done with it. I want it to go away. I don't want them to talk about it anymore. besides that, a big part of the story is Prowl talking about how when Cup was being put back together, basically Prowl kind of added some things to him that he thinks will make him more subordinate. Like, even though he still seems like crazy old Cup, Prowl says that now he's basically going to be giving the directions and acting the way that Prowl would want him to act. So, that's interesting. The story in itself is fine. It's an explanation that I don't think was necessarily needed, and I don't just mean the cigar thing, I mean the whole, because I would have been happy with just knowing that he had been rehabilitated by some science. That's fine. But in here we actually find out that he is now a pretender, which is interesting. So the story I don't think was completely necessary, but I'm glad that they did it. Another thing is I'm not a huge fan of this art style. And the art is by Nick Roche as well as the story. I'm just not a huge fan. Sorry. And like, to tell the truth, like, I know this is going to sound really stupid, but I opened this and I thought that that was Megatron. And then I was like, oh, he has an Autobot symbol and the head thing. But when I first opened it up, that is what I thought it was. And I don't know if that's just me being stupid or something I can actually attribute to the art style. But overall, I don't hate it. It's very meh for me. The art's very meh, and some of the parts of the story are meh. I do think that the Prowl kind of controlling Cup a little bit thing is interesting, and I do think the whole pretender thing is interesting. So, overall, meh. The next story is a Perceptor story, and this is a story that I was very excited to read, because I think we all kind of wondered kind of how we went from the Perceptor, and we can say up to Spotlight Drift, to the Perceptor that we got in All Hail Megatron that was like a sniper. So basically what this story is, and it is called Lost and Found, is pretty much, like I said, how Perceptor went from being the scientist to the sniper. Yeah, it just starts off with Blur and Drift kind of talking and playing a game, and then they find out that Perceptor is now back online after what happened in Spotlight Drift. And they find Perceptor kind of building all these new things for himself. Basically, he's just modifying himself to perform differently than he usually would. And everyone's kind of like, why is Perceptor doing that? And even Cup says at one point, we don't need you in the field, Perceptor. That's not where you belong. You belong in the lab. That's where you can help us out the most. And Perceptor feels, at least he says that he feels like he really owes it to the Autobots to be more help, and he thinks that he'd be more helpful if he was actually fighting. And of course, nobody agrees with that. They're all like, what is wrong with you? But then suddenly there's a transmission from Hot Rod, who's being chased by Bludgeon, so they all go out to fight Bludgeon, and Perceptor stays back, as he's told. So they go out and they fight Bludgeon, and Monstructor is formed, and everything's going to crap, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's an explosion, Monstructor is exploded, and we see it's Perceptor, who's come out anyway to fight. And Blaster is like, Perceptor, what is wrong with you? You don't have to do this. He actually at one point says that he's defiled himself. So, there you go. Yeah, and it all just ends with them going after the Decepticons that were getting away. So, this story, I think, was just what it needed to be. We got to see Perceptor's change into what he became. I really do like the overall fact that no one was really happy about what Perceptor did. Like, he wasn't actually... because I was worried it was going to be everyone's like, oh, now Perceptor's more useful because he's a sniper. And everyone's like, no, he's more useful as a scientist. He's more useful doing what he needs to do and being what he's supposed to be. And so no one's really happy about him changing himself. But really, that's all that the story is we see him become what he becomes in All Hail Megatron. Which is fine. So I don't really have anything wrong with the story. And the artwork is fine. It's, the artwork is fine. It's Casey Kohler, and I like it. But like all the other stories in Coda, there's some things that don't really make sense. They seem to just be kind of written in there without anyone checking. Like, interestingly enough, Blur and Drift are playing the Earth game of Go, which I've never played before. But they haven't been to Earth yet. This is before All Hail Megatron takes place, so they haven't been there, so how can they even know what Earth is?